Hi, I'm Blue Flame. I make videos about whatever I want. Today I'm continuing my pursuit of outlining my ideal version of the Universal Orlando Resort. Today, focusing on Islands of Adventure. Much like my Universal Studios Florida video, I'll be going land by land, saying what I would change to make Islands of Adventure the best I think it can be, according to my personal preferences. Others have done this before, the main one in recent memory being VincentVision. I don't think he was the first one to do something like this, but I've been crediting him with the idea. And I actually watched his videos doing this, so that's the only example that I could be consciously repeating, which is why whenever I use an idea that he also had in his video, I played this chime. If I do parrot ideas, he said, it's typically because either they are just genuinely good ideas, or they're concepts that have been extensively rumored or wished for by Universal fans even before this video came out. I'd recommend watching his videos on the perfect Universal Studios Florida and Islands of Adventure if you like this one, as well as my video on Universal Studios Florida. The only rules are anything that I do needs to be plausible according to space, budget, and law, and should be something that Universal would be reasonably likely to do and have motivation to do in a hypothetical scenario. And a reminder, none of this is real, it's just ideas, and it's just for fun. Before we begin on Islands of Adventure, there were some things in my Universal Studios Florida video that I asked for your opinions on, so based on your suggestions, I'd like to make some addendums. Firstly, regarding the Ghostbusters attraction, it's an inconsequential detail, but I've settled on the name Ecto Plus for the vehicle used in the story of the simulator, which fits the idea of it being simply an upgraded Ecto 1. Next, regarding the Pokemon coaster, I originally had the ride vehicles be straddle vehicles based around Miraidon and Koraidon from Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. That would be pseudo-dueling. I asked for suggestions of different Pokemon to act as the ride vehicles because I was concerned that basing the coaster off of the legendaries of the newest generation would date the ride, and using a more iconic, older Pokemon would be better. I did get some suggestions, the best of which being Gyarados, but even with that, I still really like the idea of Miraidon and Koraidon straddle coasters. I can picture them so clearly. Their concept translates so easily into a vehicle, and honestly, I love straddle coasters, so I'm biased towards them. So I'm sticking with Miraidon and Koraidon. There are some changes to the Transformers attraction, but we won't get to that yet, because I've decided to move the Transformers attraction out of Studios Florida and into Islands of Adventure, because I believe it will be a better fit there. We will return to it. For now, let's focus on what will be replacing that Transformers attraction, which I will remind you, in case you haven't seen the previous video, was on the former Fear Factor live plot between Diagon Alley and the Splatoon ride, which replaced Men in Black. There's more space here than I previously thought, and I realized you could potentially fit an Omnimover style dark ride here, especially using Universal's skills for getting things into tight spaces, such as using multi-story show buildings. And I debated over what to put here for a while, but eventually the perfect answer hit me. The facade will be themed to the original Universal Studios building, but the sign, instead of reading Universal Studios, will read Universal's Ride the Movies. And this Omnimover dark ride will take guests through key scenes from multiple historic movies from Universal's history, in what can be best described as Universal's version of the Great Movie Ride. The ride vehicles will resemble the Universal globe in different colors such as blue, silver, and gold, and it would take you through scenes from the following movies: Jaws, E.T., Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, Frankenstein, Dracula, King Kong, Twister, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Les Miserables, and Wicked. Les Miserables and Wicked are both there to provide some musical moments, with Defying Gravity and Can You Hear the People Sing, respectively. The ride would have onboard audio as the moments play out before you. I love this attraction for Universal Florida because its tagline has always been to ride the movies, and Universal's Ride the Movies would accomplish this perfectly, a crowning attraction of the park. Here is the map for Universal Studios Florida with the changes. Now that we've finished those addendums, let's get into Islands of Adventure. Just like last time, we'll begin at the entrance of the park and move around clockwise. I might switch around the order of some lands a bit, but regardless, we enter the park through Port of Entry, and nothing is changing there. I don't know what you would change in Port of Entry. It seems to be overwhelmingly regarded as a great entrance, and the lack of alteration continues into the first real land we find ourselves in, Marvel Superhero Island. When it comes to Marvel Superhero Island, there's not a lot you really can do. According to the Marvel contract, there is nothing in it that says Universal isn't allowed to change anything. They are allowed to make reasonable changes, like updating costumes, retracting the Hulk, updating the Spider-Man screen footage, but they can't add anything major. It isn't against the contract for them to make additions, but they need to get permission from Marvel, and obviously Disney owns Marvel, and has the power to stop Universal from making any major changes, even if it isn't in breach of contract. If Universal wanted to add something big and new really badly, they would have to go to court with Disney over it, and that isn't a game that many people like to play. The only way I could make changes to MSI according to the rules I've set for myself would be completely re-theming the land to a different IP, and then argue why it would still be plausible for Universal to want to do that. But they wouldn't. MSI may be aging, but it's still well liked. It has the benefit of keeping Marvel away from Disney's parks, and you wouldn't find any IP more popular than Marvel right now to replace it with. All things that I covered in my video, Why Marvel Superhero Island Isn't Going Anywhere. So long story short, Marvel Superhero Island isn't going anywhere. And say what you will about the land aging, but many people like how we have a Marvel land that's more rooted in the colorful, campy 90s era of the comics, and not influenced by the MCU. All to say, MSI is staying unchanged, and there's nothing wrong with that. So moving on, the first thing we're actually touching is in Toon Lagoon, specifically the Toon Lagoon Theater, which hasn't been used consistently in forever, so it seems logical to put a new attraction here. But this attraction won't be part of either of the lands around it. It will be its own singular attraction, kind of like how Kong currently is in this park. And what kind of attraction are we going to put in this space? I recently became aware of the Hypersphere 360 at SeaWorld Abu Dhabi, this incredible dome theater model by Intamin with a wide range of motion and effects. And as soon as I saw this theater, I immediately was inspired to see an attraction themed to time travel be used with this model. You're in a dome, you travel to different eras and see big set pieces from history happen around you. And I realized I had an opportunity right here. You probably see where I'm going with this. We're going to theme this dome theater to Back to the Future. My current name for it is Back to the Future Chronodome. The ride will be an exhibition of Doc Brown's next time machine, this time called the Chronodome. Everyone in the ride is a volunteer for its testing. Doc built the dome to test time travel on a large number of people. The Dome Theater will play out multiple effects as you're taken through multiple eras in time, with Doc coaching you through audio, recorded by Christopher Lloyd. Things start off well as you travel through multiple eras safely, and then things will go slightly out of control, and you'll have a T-Rex attack you, which will make this the second place in the park where you can get that experience. The machine loses control, leading to the climax of the ride, before Doc gets things under control again and brings you back to the present. And we can also move the DeLorean and the Doc meet and greet from the Studios Park to outside this ride. Alright, let's move on to Toon Lagoon. I'm going to be predictable, do the most basic thing, and retheme the Toon Lagoon land to SpongeBob. Everyone has suggested this, and for a while I was in the camp of doubt, thinking Universal wouldn't do this, because despite the fact that the IPs present haven't been relevant for a long time, it isn't really necessary. The water rides are still well liked, some of the best water rides in theme parks as a whole. It's just money you don't need to spend, and you'd have to license SpongeBob, and even paying for that you wouldn't have it exclusively because Nickelodeon hands out the license very willingly. And even so, I'm doing it here because firstly, it makes for a more interesting video. Secondly, Popeye just entered the public domain, which shows how outdated the IPs are getting. And third, even if the other parks have SpongeBob attractions, Universal will obviously create more heavily themed and high quality ones, which will always be more effective than just the presence of the brand on its own. And finally, despite the fact that Toon Lagoon doesn't need a retheme, a quality water-based land with a relevant IP is technically better than the same water-based land with an outdated IP. And since this is my ideal version of Islands of Adventure, I think it's justified to include, and it's plausible enough that it could happen. I still don't think it's likely, but it doesn't have to be, just plausible, and I'm very generous with that word. How to do the retheme is pretty obvious, nothing that hasn't been said before. Ripsaw Falls becomes the boating school, Popeyes changes its name to the Bikini Bottom Barges and you simply travel through recreations of landmarks from Bikini Bottom. The restaurants become the Krusty Krab and the Chum Bucket, etc. And you could recreate the SpongeBob store over here and then use that space for something DreamWorks related or Hollywood related or something. Next, we reach Kong, and as you might have guessed, this is where Transformers is going. A simulator-style attraction would fit fine in this space. The ride system for Kong isn't anyone's favorite. The one downside of removing Kong would be the animatronic, but you possibly could move it to ride the movies back in the Studios Park, which, since this is my video, is what I'm saying would happen, because I want the animatronic to be preserved. And as I've said before, Transformers isn't something that I have a lot of knowledge about, but my friend Daniel knows more than me, and I took some of his suggestions to heart. You will be replaying the memories of a Transformer from before the fall of Cybertron in the simulator. It will be like Star Tours, with different characters that you can run into. The characters' designs, as I said in the previous video, wouldn't be based on any particular generation, but a mix, trying to combine the features and portrayals that are most liked by fans for each character. Next is Jurassic Park. I don't want to change the land to Jurassic World. I think that the original movie will always be the most timeless, and VelociCoaster is a great attraction that gives that era of the franchise enough representation. But I feel like it's not unreasonable to suggest replacing the Jurassic Park River Adventure with a new Jurassic Park ride. It needs an update. It's aged quite poorly, and it was always a bad idea to put animatronics and water so close together. So I think it's the safest to replace it with an attraction that doesn't have that problem. And when we could try to take the system from the Jurassic World ride in Beijing and make a version for Jurassic Park, we'd then have two rides with that system in the same park. So we want to do a different system, and if I had to suggest anything, I'd suggest an indoor roller coaster similar to the system used in Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind, with vehicles that can change orientation to direct ride attention. It would be a mostly dark ride with only a few swoops and a single drop, because I want to make sure this ride wouldn't be too intense for families. We'd reuse assets from other Jurassic Park and World rides where we can, and it would mainly be a dark ride where you'd travel through the park and see dinosaurs, and then obviously when things go wrong, the ride starts to go faster as you run from the dinosaurs, and you finish with a big T-Rex animatronic. This would require Universal to replicate this kind of coaster system, or work with a manufacturer that could, or work with Vekoma themselves to replicate the system, but I don't know whether there are any legal holdups on that, which wouldn't be out of the question. I feel as long as it was done with effort and kept the natural appeal of River Adventure in getting to observe dinosaurs with just the right amount of thrill, this would be the perfect attraction for Jurassic Park. You could still have several sections that go above or alongside the water. Next up we come to Hogsmeade, and just like the last Harry Potter land, I don't feel the need to touch it. Nothing particularly sticks out to me. And I've decided that much like the Universal Studios Florida video, we'll be skipping the Lost Continent and coming back to it at the end, because it has a lot of big changes. So, instead, we're going to venture over to Seuss Landing first. First thing, we should refurbish/redo the Cat in the Hat ride. It used to be a high-quality dark ride, but sadly, it's just aged and been neglected. I imagine that when the movie comes out, they might reimagine the ride as a result. Because the quality of the Illumination Seuss adaptations has been questionable, I doubt it will be connected to the movie directly, but the attention to the Cat in the Hat as a brand might spur a refresh, with some of the same general concepts without the exact same style. Familiar, but not identical. The other modification in Seuss Landing would be the cancelled Mount Crumpet coaster, adding a more family-oriented coaster to Islands of Adventure and giving the Grinch, arguably the most popular Seuss character, a permanent presence in Seuss Landing. There's some space and backstage area that can be used. I picture it looking somewhat similar to this Frozen coaster in Disney Hong Kong, Wandering Oak and Sliding Sleighs. There'd be a couple animatronics, but beyond that, not much more than this comparison. A small, decent, fun family coaster themed to the Grinch. And now, we're ready for the Lost Continent to create the Kingdom of Hyrule from The Legend of Zelda. Now, to turn the Lost Continent into the Kingdom of Hyrule, we'll need to decide what games and aesthetics will be in the interpretation of the land. Unlike Mario, which has a fairly consistent visual style and tone, each game in the Zelda franchise has different looks and vibes than the previous. You can have a Link who looks as detailed as he does in Twilight Princess, all the way to the games featuring Toon Link, and more recently, Toy Link. We want to create a Zelda land that will age well and generally be recognizable as Zelda. So I think we will draw from all of Zelda, but create a consistent, in-the-middle style, drawing our biggest inspirations from Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild, but with references to other Zelda games all throughout the land. So you might see some wood carvings that clearly resemble the King of Red Lions, or a stained glass window that seems to portray a Loftwing, or a stone fountain that seems to resemble the Mirror of Twilight, or a tapestry that depicts an apocalyptic scene of the moon crashing into the earth, just as some examples. The first attraction in this land will be a dark ride called The Legend of Zelda Hero's Quest. The facade of the entrance will be the Temple of Time, and due to the space needed for a ride building, the entrance might be all the way up to where the fountain is right now. But this will be a hybrid dark ride that begins as a boat ride and then at a certain point switches to a hanging dark ride. This was patented for a Legend of Zelda attraction, and as of right now, hasn't come to pass. But beyond even this, there will be a whole additional layer to this attraction, as it will be a shooting gallery. Similar to Link's crossbow training, there will be a crossbow apparatus attached to the ride vehicles, and you'll shoot at enemies from the Legend of Zelda series as you go through a tour through various identifiable Zelda locations, and you would see Link riding past on Epona through the scenes. And the final scene might even be a battle with Ganon. I would be satisfied to see this just be a dark ride, but Nintendo seems to want all their rides to have gameplay elements, and while a shooting ride is a bit uninspired, because it's the most common type of gamified attraction, there is a reason for that. I can't think of anything that would fit better. The second attraction would be a Zelda roller coaster. It would go in the space where Poseidon's Fury currently is. That space is somewhat small. I feel like you would have part of it on the water, probably. I'm picturing that it would be a roller coaster through a ruined dungeon temple, part indoor, part outdoor. There are these mine carts in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and the coaster wouldn't be reminiscent of any specific location from those games, but you could have the trains resemble them, and possibly have a rocking back and forth feature on them, replicating something like the mine trains from the Seven Dwarves mine train at Magic Kingdom. You'd start inside, and it would be dark, and the coaster would start slow as you pass through dim torches on the wall, until you hit a launch. You'd go inside and outside as you travel through the half-broken spires of a ruined temple. It would likely be multi-level, which would also help with limited space, and there would be a handful of animatronics throughout. There wouldn't be a gamifying element for this one. No one really wants a gamifying element on a roller coaster. They're an exception. It doesn't seem like Minecart Madness has one either, so if this one doesn't, that's fine. Much like Minecart Madness, it would instead replicate the feel of the game mechanics in its layout and design, such as the puzzle-solving chime, playing and opening up a waterfall right before the trains pass through it, causing guests to not get wet. It would be an intermediate-level coaster, higher intensity than Hagrid's, but not on the level of Hulk or Velocicoaster. Let's call this coaster the Lost Temple Trial. Mythos would remain, but its facade would be turned into a version of the Great Deku Tree with a restaurant inside. This would not only be a great inclusion that harkens to Zelda, but also a nod to the defunct Enchanted Oak Tavern that used to be in the Lost Continent. Much like how Pikmin are hidden around Super Nintendo World, Koroks would be hidden in the nooks and crannies of this land. There would also be little puzzles hidden in places that attempt to emulate the puzzles from Zelda dungeons. Really just the same kind of little minigames you see in Super Nintendo World and Donkey Kong Country. There would also be a shrine-like area, either inside the Deku Tree restaurant or outside somewhere, where the Master Sword is placed in the ground. Much like the Sword in the Stone at Magic Kingdom, you can try to pull it out, and it could be magnetically controlled by a crew member, or you could somehow tie it into the minigame elements. And with that, we've looped back around and have finished my ideal version of Universal Islands of Adventure. Here's the map. I will say, if these changes happened, Islands would have one of the greatest coaster lineups in the world. It's already stacked with Hulk, Velocicoaster, and Hagrid's, and then if you added a Jurassic World coaster, a Zelda coaster, and a decent family coaster with Grinch, you have a lot of coasters that are themed, distinct, and the lineup has something for everyone. Maybe it's a sign that I've relied too much on coasters, though. I don't know. Tell me what you think. Tell me your ideas for how Islands of Adventure could be changed. In the description will be links to VincentVision's videos I mentioned earlier, as well as my earlier videos on the Studios Park and my video on Marvel Superhero Island. I'd really appreciate it if you could check that video out if you haven't seen it. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for waiting for this video. I'll see you next time.